Every empire believes it will last forever. Every empire believes it is different. Every empire believes the rules of history don't apply to them. But when you look back at the last 500 years, one truth becomes unmistakably clear. Every empire falls, not suddenly, not dramatically, but through a slow, predictable cycle that always ends the same way. And today, as America stands at a historic crossroads, this cycle is more relevant than ever. Empires don't collapse because they are conquered. They collapse because the forces that once made them powerful begin to work against them. Success creates confidence. Confidence creates complacency. Complacency creates fragility, and fragility invites decline. The Dutch believed they had mastered global trade. The British believed their industrial might would never fade, and the Romans believed their power was ordained by destiny itself. But history does not bend for belief, it only follows patterns. Those patterns begin with the rise. A nation becomes disciplined, hardworking, innovative, and hungry. It invests in education, productivity, and long-term growth. It builds strong institutions that reward talent and punish corruption. The Dutch did it through maritime trade, the British through industry, the Americans through technology and global finance. Every rise is built on the same foundation, a generation willing to sacrifice comfort for progress. But as an empire becomes wealthy, its behavior changes. Hard work becomes optional. Savings turn into spending. Debt begins to rise faster than productivity. Politics becomes louder than policy. And unity gives way to division. These aren't modern issues, these are late-stage symptoms. They appeared in the Dutch Republic before its decline. They appeared in Victorian Britain as Germany and America rose behind it. And they are appearing in America now in ways impossible to ignore. U.S. national debt has crossed $34 trillion. Total U.S. debt, government, corporate, and household, now exceeds $90 trillion, something no previous empire has ever sustained without major consequences. Political polarization has reached levels last seen in the 1960s. Trust in institutions has fallen to historic lows. And the money printing wave of 2020 to 2021 increased the U.S. dollar supply by nearly 40%, the fastest surge in modern history, something that usually occurs only during wartime or major economic resets. These pressures do not mark collapse, but they mark transition, the same transition every empire enters when it moves from peak to decline. At the same time, history warns us that empires don't fall in isolation. They fall when another power rises at the same moment. For the Dutch, it was Britain. For the British, it was the United States. And today, that rising power is China, a nation that has grown from poverty to global influence in just 4 decades. A nation that leads in manufacturing, infrastructure, and long-term planning. A nation that rivals U.S. GDP in purchasing power and is closing the gap in technology, trade, and military reach. These shifts do not mean America is finished, far from it, but they do mean America is entering a stage every great empire has faced, a stage where internal challenges collide with external pressure. A stage where decisions become harder, cycles become sharper, and the next 20 years become more important than the last 50. If you're still listening, it means you are not looking for headlines or opinions. You want structure, truth, and historical clarity. You are paying attention to the deeper forces shaping America's future, and that alone puts you ahead of most people. Stay with this. Understanding the cycle is the first step toward navigating what comes next, because in the next part, we dive into the heart of the pattern, the exact reasons every empire declines, and why America is now experiencing those same forces in real time. When you examine every major empire in history, you begin to see the same internal forces pulling them down from the inside. These forces don't appear suddenly. They grow slowly, invisibly, across generations, until one day they reshape the entire order. And today, those forces are reappearing in the United States in the same sequence that once ended the Dutch, the British, the Spanish, the Ottomans, and countless others. The first force is debt. Empires rise by investing. They decline by borrowing. In their early stages, nations save more than they spend. They build infrastructure, strengthen education, and create industries that make them globally competitive. But as they become wealthier, spending outpaces earning. Borrowing becomes easier than discipline. Governments start financing lifestyles rather than productivity. And slowly, debt grows faster than income, turning prosperity into fragility. This is exactly what happened to the Dutch in the late 1600s and to the British in the early 1900s. Today, America faces the same imbalance. Federal debt is above 120% of GDP. Interest payments are rising faster than national income. And the dollar's position, once unquestioned, is now being challenged by nations seeking alternatives. The second force is internal conflict. Every declining empire becomes divided long before it becomes weak. As wealth concentrates, inequality rises. As inequality rises, trust falls. Politics becomes a battle instead of a process. Citizens stop believing in the same national identity. Groups turn against each other, and the social fabric that once united the empire begins to tear. This pattern appeared in Rome before it fell. It appeared in Britain before its decline, and it is unmistakably visible in the United States today, from polarized elections to cultural fragmentation to declining faith in institutions. A house divided cannot lead a world divided. The third force is overextension. Empires often take on more global responsibilities than they can afford. They expand militarily, economically, and politically until the cost of maintaining influence exceeds the benefits. The Dutch tried to defend trade posts across the world and were overwhelmed by Britain. The British tried to maintain colonies on every continent and were drained by world wars. Today, America spends more on its military than the next 10 nations combined, operates over 750 bases worldwide, and bears the cost of defending a global order while dealing with rising domestic challenges at home. History shows that no empire can sustain global reach if its internal foundation weakens. The fourth force is currency decline. Every empire's currency begins its life strong, trusted, and stable. But as debt rises and money printing accelerates, that trust begins to fade. The Dutch guilder collapsed after massive wartime debt. The British pound lost over 90% of its value during the 20th century. Today, the US dollar remains the world's reserve currency, but its dominance has gradually slipped from 71% to around 59%, while global central banks increase reserves in gold and non-dollar assets. Currency decline doesn't mean collapse, but it always marks the beginning of a new financial era. The fifth force is technological displacement. Empires lead when they innovate. They decline when others innovate faster. Britain fell behind the US in electricity, steel, and industrial systems. The U.S. once led the world in manufacturing, telecommunications, and semiconductor production. Today, China leads in manufacturing output, EV production, solar technology, and is catching up rapidly in AI and quantum computing. Power always shifts toward the nation that creates the future, not the one protecting the past. If you're still listening, it means you understand something crucial. Decline is never caused by one event. It is caused by the accumulation of many pressures, economic, political, social, and technological, happening at the same time. And this is the stage every empire enters before the order shifts. But decline is not destiny. Every empire has one final choice: either confront the cycle with discipline and unity, or deny it until the consequences become unavoidable. In the next part, we will confront the most important question of all. What does this cycle mean for America's future, and what happens next when empires reach this point? So what happens next? What does history warn us about the decades ahead? And what does it mean for America, the world's most influential nation of the past century? The truth is both reassuring and unsettling. Empires do not fall in an instant. They do not vanish overnight. They evolve, they shift, they recalibrate, and the world around them reshapes itself to match a new reality. The next stage of America's cycle will not be defined by collapse, but by competition. A rising China will continue to challenge U.S. leadership in technology, manufacturing, and global influence. The dollar will remain powerful, yet gradually share space with alternative currencies and digital systems. Global alliances will reorganize not out of ideology, but out of necessity. Nations will no longer choose sides based on loyalty. They will choose based on opportunity. Inside the United States, the defining question of the next 20 years will be unity. History is clear. Empires survive late-stage decline only when they rebuild internal strength, when citizens rediscover shared purpose, when institutions regain trust, when economic opportunity reaches not just the wealthy, but the majority. If America can regain this unity, it can extend its leadership for decades. If it cannot, power will continue to shift outward to rising nations that are more coordinated, more long-term in their vision, and more aligned in their national purpose. Technologically, the landscape ahead will be transformative. AI, quantum computing, biotechnology, and energy innovation will determine which nations rise and which fall. The countries that lead these fields will not just shape markets, they will shape the world order itself. Britain dominated coal. America dominated electricity and computing, and the next global leader will dominate artificial intelligence and advanced manufacturing. This competition will define the century, but the greatest changes will not come from governments. They will come from economics. Every major transition in history, Dutch to British, British to American, and now American to a multipolar world, was driven by shifting patterns of productivity, trade, and innovation. As supply chains reorganize and global demand moves eastward, power will disperse. The world will rely less on a single leader and more on a network of regional powers. And that transition will define everything from currencies to security alliances to technological standards. If you're still listening, it means you understand the weight of this moment. You recognize that we are not living in ordinary times. We are living in the late stages of a cycle that has repeated for centuries. And understanding this cycle is not just knowledge, it is survival. Because when world orders change, everything changes. Economies, careers, investments, alliances, even the way nations interpret stability and security. But here is the part most people miss. A changing world order is not the end of America. It is the end of a chapter. And like every great nation in history, America now faces a choice, whether to resist the cycle or redefine itself through it. Empires that ignore the warning signs fade. Empires that confront them evolve. The United States has the resources, the talent, and the global presence to remain a leading power, but only if it addresses the same forces that once brought down every empire before it: debt, division, overextension, loss of competitiveness, and institutional decline. History warns us of the path ahead, but it also offers a blueprint for renewal. And that is the deeper purpose of understanding this cycle: not to predict collapse, but to prepare for change, not to fear the future, but to navigate it with clarity, because the world ahead will not be shaped by the strongest nation. It will be shaped by the nation most willing to adapt. Every empire falls, but the story of what comes next is not written by history. It is written by those who understand it